They had a vision for a better Virginia, a Virginia that supported its hardworking families, a Virginia where children could grow up in a safe and a healthy community, and where they could have access to fair and equitable education, a Virginia where racism and sexism and classism and myriad social ills would be relics of our past, a Virginia where its residents would have control over the major decisions that affected their lives. They formed the Virginia Organizing Project, a statewide organization dedicated to improving civic engagement and participation across our state. Now, we are Virginia Organizing, a nonpartisan grassroots organization challenging injustice by empowering individuals and local communities to address issues that impact the quality of their lives. We do this by centering the voices of directly affected people, working tirelessly to build power with and for each other, and by using a variety of strategies to move our communities and our decision makers to action. Although our early efforts focused primarily on racial justice, we now include myriad issues in our daily work. We have 16 active chapters across the Commonwealth working on education equity, which includes tackling the school to prison pipeline, criminal justice reform, immigration, and the subject of our conversation tonight, environmental justice. We are winning, and we're proud of the work that we do because it makes a difference in the lives of the people we love. This month has brought us some environmental justice setbacks. We didn't do as well as we'd hoped in the General Assembly regular and special sessions. Neither the Green New Deal nor the Environmental Justice Omnibus Bill nor the public utilities bills we supported passed. Some of us watched yesterday as the last tree sitters were extracted from Yellowfinch, allowing the disastrous Mountain Valley Pipeline to continue. But with the energy and with the talent of every person in this room, we can and we will keep moving forward to more victories. Here's how we're going to proceed tonight. First, we'll take about 15 minutes to hear from some powerful people working on environmental justice. Then we'll hear from Representative McEachin, and he'll give us some updates on his work. Afterward, our members and our partner organizations who are here tonight have prepared some questions for the Congressman. So let's get started with our three speakers who want to share their experiences with us. Each one will have 5 minutes. First is Sheila Carter from the Norfolk chapter of Virginia Organizing. Sheila, when you're ready, the microphone is yours.
All right, let me try to find Sheila here and see if I can unmute her. Okay, here we go. Go ahead, Sheila, you can unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sheila Carter. I'm a nurse and a Hampton Roads resident and a leader in the Norfolk chapter of the Virginia Organizing. Flooding is a big deal for us in the Hampton Roads area. One study finds that about 27,000 people in Norfolk live on exposed land below 6 feet, and there is a 66% risk of at least one flood over 6 feet taking place today and 2050 in the Norfolk area. I personally have experienced the horrible flooding that takes place regularly in Norfolk. See, I live in Berkeley, and in Berkeley on Hibby Street, that street completely floods out. You can't get out of the parking lot here where I live at in the apartment complex. You can't go across the railroad track. You can't get to the store until the flooding goes down. I worked in the downtown area of Norfolk, and in that area up there by WTKR, the Chrysler Museum, it's floods. And it doesn't even have to rain hard for it to flood. In a lot of our areas, we are dealing with flooding. And flooding is only the tip of the iceberg. See, in Hampton Roads, there are chemical disasters. There are unrelated tanks storing all sorts of toxic stuff in neighborhoods along the Elizabeth River. There is a lack of public transportation and an overdependence of cars and trucks. But of course, flooding is the first and most visible problem in our community, and is our early impact of climate change. Flooding is occurring due to compounding efforts, subsiding of our land, sea level rise, and more extreme weather events, which are occurring more frequently. Any one of these impacts might not be noticeable by itself, but they are all symptoms of climate change, which is accelerating instead of slowing down. We must tackle climate change. And this is a big, scary topic. But we can't be distracted. We must seize the opportunity. Stopping the accelerating flooding in Norfolk and the Hampton Roads is a necessity. We must combat sea level rise, and we must reverse climate change. We must put money into public regulated and regulate the storage of toxic chemicals. The lives of our Hampton Roads residents depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. Next, we have Sherry Shannon from Southside Relief. Whenever you're ready, Sherry, you can have the mic.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cherie Shannon, pronouns she, her, and I'm the co-founder of Southside Relief, which is a community organization to dedicating a greener and healthier environment for South Richmond residents. Richmond was in the news a lot last summer because of the removal of Confederate monuments and the reclamation of the Robert E. Lee statue into a community space after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Now, we call that green space around the statue Marcus David Peters Circle, who was a biology teacher and unfortunately was killed by the police in 2018 while experiencing a mental health crisis. And the reasons why I uplift this space is because it's absolutely incredible. The New York Times Style magazine actually ranked the statue and that area around it as the #1 piece of protest art since World War II. Artists used the base of the statue as a canvas. Folks started a community garden, a community library. There was a basketball hoop at one point. And there was a sign welcoming people into the circle. And so symbolically, it was a physical space for connection and community building. But what's striking about MDP Circle is this backdrop where what's happening behind it, because it's located on Monument Avenue. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Monument Avenue, it's surrounded by $1 million homes, which was sold to white families during the Jim Crow era, where the main attraction were those monuments. So imagine picturesque tree-lined streets that provide shade and sidewalks that act as a promenade for people, but it's actually a physical manifestation of racism and white supremacy. I point this out because even though redlining and segregation were outlawed decades ago, you can still see and feel how divided the city is. As soon as you cross the river to South Richmond, you immediately see smokestacks, warehouses, and factories. Now, as adults, we can articulate what that difference looks like. We know that it's based on power structures, but We also have to remember that our kids recognize the difference too. They can look around in their surroundings and see how their house in their neighborhood compares to other parts of the city. They know where they're in certain neighborhoods if they have to cross the street because there are sidewalks. There are more corner stores than there are grocery stores. Are they able to safely walk to school when it rains because the street is flooded? When we're talking about environmental justice, this is a conversation about political power and capital. So in Richmond, the history of redlining, urban renewal, and even the annexation of Chesterfield County, which actually acted to reduce the power of the Black vote, all of these things were about political capital and folks making the decision to increase the land value and homes for one group of people while excluding and marginalizing the rest. So in Southside Richmond, I should say, because we do have Southside Virginia, but in Southside Richmond, instead of grocery stores, pharmacies, and banks, we have highways, factories, landfills, and dollar stores. Everyone cannot walk to 10 minutes to access a park or a playground. And the environmental racism and injustice people experience every day primarily happens in Black, Latino, Asian, Native, immigrant, and poor communities. There's a high number of residents with chronic illnesses such as diabetes, asthma, and obesity. We're number 8 in the country for the highest asthma-related emergency room visits, all of which contributes to a 20-year shorter life expectancy than other parts of the city. The greatest weather-related threat is extreme heat, and in certain parts of Richmond, it can be up to 20 degrees hotter because there's more pavement than tree canopy. Richmond has the second highest eviction rates in the country as well, due to a higher concentration of poverty. Again, that correlation being in primarily poor neighborhoods. We're talking about crumbling infrastructure, underperforming schools, community violence, and limited access to healthcare. All of this takes a toll on a person's mental health and leads to generational trauma. Essentially, our neighborhoods were designed to fail. People are trying to survive through an ongoing man-made disaster. And the only way out of this is with an urgent policy response and equitable funding priorities to match it. We shouldn't always be on the defense. We shouldn't always have to protect our land, reacting to the development of a pipeline, an oil spill, toxic water, and polluted air. We end up fighting years and years against these powerful entities that cause harm that could have been prevented from the start if we had stronger regulations in the first place. So that's why my organization, Southside Relief, we support legislation like the Environmental Justice for All Act because we need proactive federal policies to address environmental disparities. One of the main reasons we felt it was necessary to create Southside Relief was for the simple fact that the voices, concerns, and work of community members are consistently ignored. So we decided on the ground to address these barriers by planting and maintaining community gardens and trees, reducing pollution, developing the technical skills of residents and having them lead greening discussions, educating our neighbors on the importance of climate change, and then passing the mic so they can use their own voice to advocate for what they want to see in their neighborhood. And we do this using data and a community-driven process to create a master plan that's actually led by residents from start to finish. At the heart of everything that we do, we are working to advance racial, economic, and gender equity. And so we ask ourselves, how are we addressing housing, education, healthcare, and transportation? Where can we collaborate with partner groups to increase access to green spaces, jobs, and civic engagement? Is our work trauma informed? And does it focus on social resilience in addition to climate resilience? All of these things impact the well-being of a person and their potential to thrive. But we need mandated state and federal agencies to adopt environmental justice policies. It must be codified into law. A concerted effort must be made through policy and advocacy efforts to rectify years of environmental damage done to our communities. So let's ensure that we are reshaping the reality of the next generation of kids where parks, playgrounds, trees, and safe communal spaces are the norm, not hazards and risks. I want to thank you for your time this evening. If you want to stay connected, please visit southsiderelief.org to learn more about our organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cherie. And our final speaker for this evening is Russell Chisholm from Protect Our Water Heritage Rights.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks also to the NRV chapter of Virginia Organizing for inviting me to speak alongside Sheila and Cherie for the opportunity to listen to them and learn from them as well. When I decided to start showing up for my community in the fight against Mountain Valley Pipeline, I doubt I fully understood that we were on the front lines of climate and environmental justice. We began by organizing around the protection of water and land against the abuse of eminent domain by corporations and so-called regulators, and in defense of our rural, elderly, and economically disadvantaged neighbors. Over the course of these past 6 years, we have seen failures at every level of government to protect our health and safety. We have been surveilled by law enforcement and private corporate security, barred from entry onto public roads and lands, and silenced at public meetings either through a lack of access or through outright intimidation from the presence of uniformed and off-duty police officers. All of this has been carried out in the name of unproven economic benefit. Mountain Valley stands as a clear example of socialized harm for private profit, and they're getting ready to try to do it again through the proposed Lambert compressor station in Pittsylvania County, Virginia, near 4 identified environmental justice communities and adjacent to 2 existing gas compressor facilities. This is happening through a permit process that relies on virtual public meetings and hearings in areas with inadequate internet services, something I relate to directly, and despite the fact that the MVP mainline project might never be completed. So rather than just a box to be checked along the way to inevitable outcomes from rubber stamp agencies, environmental justice should be the basis for determining public need and public benefit. If a community rises together to reject a dangerous or polluting project, then the project should be denied. If project backers cannot prove their local economic and jobs claims, or if those jobs are not more than temporary, then those projects are not in the public interest. If those jobs are extractive in nature or dangerous to the workers themselves, then for our communities, there is only risk and no reward. The lesson from the MVP fight when considering environmental justice is clear. If a project must be imposed upon underserved rural communities or Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities through force and intimidation, then that project is not just environmentally dangerous, it is immoral. We've watched over the past 48 hours as state and local law enforcement removed 2 tree sitters from the last standing trees along this 303-mile project. They did so at the behest of MVP and to the exclusion of legal observers, the media, and public supporters. These brave individuals are now being held without bail during this dangerous pandemic for the charge of interfering with property rights. The system that encourages such violent extraction is broken and should be discarded alongside MVP's stranded pipes. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, since 2016, 13 states have quietly enacted laws that increase criminal penalties for trespassing, damage, and interference with infrastructure sites such as oil refineries and pipelines. These laws draw from national security legislation enacted after 9/11 to protect physical infrastructure considered so vital that the incapacity or destruction of such systems and assets would have a debilitating impact on security, national economic security, national public health, or safety. This is not a system designed to protect us. We know how these laws will be enacted, and we know who they will be enforced upon because we know who wrote these laws. We need environmental justice infrastructure that does more than just transcribe public input for the appearance of consultation. We need a system that values expert local analysis of cultural and ecological resources, what we sometimes refer to rightfully as sacred spaces. We need a system that abolishes incarceration as a means of enforcing white supremacy and corporate will. Again, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak tonight and for the opportunity to listen. And I look forward to organizing around these issues with you.
Thank you so much to Sheila and to Cherie and to Russell for those very powerful words, and also for the work that you do. So just to summarize a couple of the key points that I think I heard from all of you, we've got problems related to flooding over in Norfolk. It's a serious problem for the residents there, potential for toxic waste to spill, and some significant problems related to transportation as well. And then Cherie told us about the issues with access to community green space, particularly talking about Marcus Peters Park, and then the smokestacks and the factories nearby. And then she connected environmental justice to both political power and to capital, which we know is a very, very powerful connection. Who gets left behind? So often it is poor communities and communities where racial and ethnic minorities are the majority. She told us about the extreme heat that they're facing and also the need for more funding to protect our communities. And then Russell told us about what's going on with the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the failure of government to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Told us about the consistent violation of civil rights and liberties as they've tried so hard to stand up for their communities. And also mentioned that environmental justice has to be the foundation for our public policies. We have to make sure that we are protecting sacred spaces. We thank you so much again for those comments. And at this point, we are going to hear from Congressman McEachin. And so I'll provide an introduction for those who don't know him and aren't familiar with his work. And then Congressman McEachin, I'll turn it over to you for some remarks. Representative McEachin was first elected to represent the 4th Congressional District of Virginia in the U.S. House of Representatives back in November of 2016. He serves as the co-chair of the House Democratic Environmental Message Team, co-chair of the Congressional Black Caucus's Transportation, Infrastructure, Environment, and Energy Policy Council, and also vice chair of the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition. During his first term in Congress, Representative McEachin co-founded the United for Climate and Environmental Justice Congressional Task Force, and he continues to lead the task force as its co-chair. He serves on a host of subcommittees, including the Environment and Climate Change, the Communications and Technology, and the Energy and Mineral Resources subcommittees. He's a really busy man. He leads efforts for equality, environmental protection, affordable healthcare, and to reduce gun violence. Representative McEachin is very active in the community and is a lifetime member of the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity and the NAACP. He is also a member of the Virginia State Bar and the Virginia Trial Lawyers Association. He is married to Colette, who is an attorney in the Richmond City Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, and they have 3 children. We welcome you this evening, Congressman McEachin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank Virginia Organizing for allowing me to share with you a little bit about what's going on in Washington with the issue of environmental justice. And I'm happy to report there's a lot going on. So let me start with Rahul Rahava, probably one of the greatest environmentalists that you've never heard of, unless you're deep into the environmental movement. But he is the chair of the Natural Resources Committee. And a couple of years ago, he asked me to play Robin to his Batman as we began to develop the Environmental Justice for All Act. And as we sort of sat there and thought about things, we decided that for too long, EJ communities across the nation have been dictated to by Washington as to what the solutions ought to be, almost as if one size would fit all. And while we realize that EJ communities tend to be brown, tend to be black, or even white and poor, uh, they are all disenfranchised. It's true in many ways, but they all have different problems. They all have different solution sets. And so we wanted to come up with a thought process that helped them to empower themselves. And that's what they wanted, because as we sat there and talked to them, they're the ones who really came up with the EJ for All Act. Raul and I were really just scribners. We took down what they said and helped convert it into legislative language. But they're the true authors of the EJ for All Act bill. And what that bill does, as I've already hinted, is it's meant to empower these communities. It does a couple, three things. One, it gives them the right to go to court to enforce clean air and clean water regulations under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We don't think you have to wait for a white knight to come in and save you. You shouldn't have to wait for an attorney general's office to pick up the banner. You ought to be able to get access to the courts yourself. It also has this concept that really the EJ communities educated me on, which is cumulative effect. So often when we cite a project, we do it as if it's in a silo, as if the project's there by itself, and whatever pollution it lets off is the only pollution in that particular area. No, what EJ for All says is, let's look at what the area is already suffering from before we cite another project and see what this new project would add to it. So let's take into effect the cumulative effect of what's happening in that particular neighborhood. It will codify some executive orders. It will also demand meaningful consultation between communities and the government via NEPA, rather than having the communities hear about things later on or not be consulted at all. So those are some of the main prongs of the EJ for All Act. But during the course of this dance of EJ for All, we had a presidential election. And from my perspective, thankfully, President Biden is now president. And during the course of his nomination, we had an opportunity to work with his staff on environmental justice issues. And then we came together with the Saunders people and sat down with AOC and some other folks and really hammered out a environmental or climate challenge task force that everyone could live with. I'm so pleased to report that EJ, environmental justice issues, are at the very core of that plan. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in just a moment. Simultaneously, you talk about the Lord smiling on us or all the planets being aligned. I was also put on by the speaker the select committee on the climate crisis. I call it the Castro Committee because Kathy Castro of Florida has done a magnificent job of running that committee. And out of that came, at least on my party's part, a 500-page report on how to get from where we are today to where we need to be in 2050 of being a carbon-free nation, actually a carbon-free world. And the very heart of that report is understanding that you cannot address the climate crisis without addressing environmental justice issues. And so the two have come together nicely. We now have a Democratic Congress that's committed to EJ reform, and we also have an executive that's committed to EJ reform. And part of that, to show in a demonstrative way the commitment to EJ action, is the president's promise that 40% of the monies spent on the climate crisis will be spent in environmental justice communities, meant to help them get the funds necessary to address the problems, whether it's flooding in Norfolk, whether it's green space. And yes, my sister, we need green space in Richmond like nobody's business. And I'm so happy that you pointed that out, because the heat is awful. The temperatures are killing our children. And I ditto 90% of what you said. I'm not going to bother to repeat it. Also, that 40% can be spent on giving these environmental justice communities opportunities to be the tip of the sword of what's going to be the green economy that's just around the corner, whether it's starting windmill companies in terms of building wind farms, or whether it's learning how to build solar panels, whether it's on the entrepreneurial side or the job side. We're going to provide the funds necessary to help these EJ communities be, again, the tip of the sword. Because for too long, poor communities always come along after the next big economic revolution. We want EJ communities to be at the forefront. And what am I, excuse me, excuse me. And what am I talking about when I'm talking about being at the forefront of this green revolution? You know, COVID-19 laid bare a lot of things, but among other things it's done, it's wrecked our economy. And there are those of us in the Congress who believe that the only way we're going to restart this economy is with a real solid infrastructure plan. You've already heard the president start talking about it. But that infrastructure plan, to be helpful, has to be green. We have to be talking about electric cars. We have to be talking about electric buses. We have to be talking about charging stations. We have to be talking about a green infrastructure plan, redoing our housing stock, redoing our buildings. All those things are going to require new workforces, new work skills, and an education, again, of the entire economy and the workforce, beginning with EJ communities. And that's what's so exciting about this time period as far as being a policymaker, is to be able to help implement those changes into our economy. So I'm optimistic, folks. You know, when I ran for Congress in 2016, I said that the environment was the most important issue of the 21st century. We have exactly one opportunity to get it right. We've got a finite time period to get it right in, but I'm very optimistic, even bullish, that we're going to get this done and that we're going to get this done right with your help, with your guidance, with your suggestions, and every now and then with your prodding. We will get it done. Thank you for all you do. I look forward to being your partner in this effort. I'm happy to be part of the Q&A that's supposed to follow.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We appreciate your words, and it's very nice to hear about the work that you can do. So we're going to spend the remainder of our time on Q&A. I'll call on each person who has prepared a question, and then we'll give Representative McEachin a chance to respond to each one. We do want to respect everyone's time this evening, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to your question. First, we have Lavisha Rollins, who's with Concerned Citizens of Charles City County.
Hello, Congressman McEachin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for taking this opportunity, and thank you for Virginia Organizing for having me. I want to give you a quick update on what's going on in Charles City County. There's a current litigation battle that's happening between the developer and the gas suppliers for our project. So it's halted the development of 2 large power plants being proposed for Charles City County. And so we're not sure what's going to happen or what's going on. We are right now hopeful that this is something that's going to work to our advantage, but we are not going to take our foot off the gas until we can get more information on where we stand. With that being said, this leads to my question. With many questions from the residents and the general public that this is going to affect, what rights do we have with access to getting information regarding projects like this, and the unwillingness from our local officials to speak with us regarding these projects? And so we've tried to get information at county administration meetings, we've emailed, we've sent FOIA requests, and we have no avail of where we stand. So what can we do when we're basically being blocked out from preparing ourselves for next steps?
Well, you know, I'd have to know more about why your FOIA requests have been denied. And, you know, if we need to talk afterwards or offline, we're more than happy to have that conversation with you, just contact the office. But FOIA would be your main tool to be able to get that information. But I will say this, the other thing that I think all EJ communities need to do is we need to be better about the business of going to our local government meetings. A lot of times this stuff gets right past us because no one was at the meeting. You know, Shirley Chisholm once said that if they don't have a chair for you at the table, bring your own folding chair. And that's what we're going to have to do more often and with greater consistency. I think part of what happened in Charles City is just that we missed some meetings. We weren't in place, and things happened without our knowing about it. But that being said, no elected official ought to be hiding the ball. Even if I like to think, even if you disagree with me, I will share with you what I'm doing. And I would hope that the elected officials in the county have the same sort of thought process. What is particularly vexing about what's going on in Charles City is that it's all state at this point. There's very little I can do as your federal official other than join you as part of the chorus of people objecting. We filed, whenever asked, we've always filed the appropriate comments objecting to the plan or suggesting that the objections be seriously considered. But I think that if we can enact EJ for all, that then gives you the power to go to court for yourself and enforce your right to clean air and clean water. And of course, those particular plants aren't doing anything for the county. They are servicing places outside of the county while leaving you with the poisonous particulate matter and other problems. So I stand with you in the fight. I know you already know that, and our office is available to you whenever and wherever we can be helpful.
Thank you, Lavisha, for that question, and also Congressman for the answer. Next, we have Roberta Kellum, who's with our Eastern Shore chapter.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Roberta Kellum, and I was asked to speak about environmental justice issues on the Eastern Shore. It's a unique area in that pretty much the entire community is an environmental justice community. And being rural, we have just a low population and a very, I would say, weak ability to have our voices heard in Richmond and with the decision makers. Something that you talked about was cumulative impacts. And just by way of example here, we have just hundreds and hundreds of chicken houses that were recently constructed. We have 2 chicken processing plants, and these chicken processing plants and they use an incredible amount of groundwater, which we are on a sole source aquifer. So that is our only source of drinking water. The way the state regulates these different, I guess, aspects of the same industry, some issues don't allow any sort of public participation. Other issues like groundwater withdrawal permit, even if we asked for a public hearing, DEQ, David Paler, can deny that public hearing, which he just recently did on a 1.6 billion gallon groundwater withdrawal. So, I'm just trying to understand what, what role the federal government can play. The EPA has designated the aquifer as a sole source aquifer. It would be good if they played a role in protecting our drinking water. The agricultural activities are exempt from a lot of even zoning. And then you have the ammonia discharges that apparently EA was going to regulate and then failed to regulate. So I just wanted to raise the issues that the rural issues that we have are different and unique. And really, I think that the federal law that you're talking about would be very helpful here, but I'm just not quite sure how we would address these issues with the rural community.
Well, thank you for the comment and the questions and the concern. And first, let me assure you that even though I live in the city of Richmond, the 4th Congressional District has more than its share of rural communities. We stretch from Richmond down to Hampton Roads, taking in counties like Sussex and Surrey and Charles City County and Southampton County, any number of rural jurisdictions who, while they're not on the Eastern Shore and don't necessarily have the backdrop that you all have, still are important areas and a beautiful countryside. And so we're equally concerned with rural EJ issues as well. You have a right, in my judgment, if I could wave a magic wand, you have a right to clean air and clean water, and you're talking about clean water. And certainly if the EJ for All Act was passed, you would have a right to sue those chicken plants in the state of Virginia to enforce your clean water rights. That's one thing that the act would do. As far as cumulative effect is concerned, it probably, I'll have to give this some more thought, it probably would only apply to the next entity that wants to come into your community. It may not impact the ones that are already there, but in terms of citing the next one, that would be a useful tool that you could use. What we need to do is to give, the Biden administration has only been in office now roughly 60, maybe 65 days, if that long. We need to give them an opportunity to get EPA revamped and restarted. There were a bunch of regulations that were rolled back by the Trump administration. The new EPA administrator hails from North Carolina. He's a great guy. And I have confidence in his viewpoints as far as environmental justice communities are concerned. So we need to give them a chance to sort of get rejiggered. One of the worst things that happened the legacy of the last administration is, you read about a lot of things, but what you didn't really get a feel for is the way they left agencies in a dispirited, fashion. People are downtrodden, experts left, folks just gave up, felt like their jobs were undervalued. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see EPA come back to life. I'm hopeful that to the extent that they have the ability to sort of push back as to what's happening in the Eastern Shore and elsewhere, they will do so. If they don't have the tools necessary, I'm more than happy, along with my colleagues, to try to give them the tools necessary so they can make sure that you have what you need, which is, the right to just a clean lifestyle, clean air, clean water, and to be able to enjoy the beautiful Eastern Shore.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Next is Elizabeth Chavez from the New River Valley chapter.
Hi, thank you, Congressman McEachin, for being here tonight. I'm a member of Virginia Organizing's statewide Environmental Justice Committee, and our recent attention has been on statewide legislation. During the past General Assembly session, 2 major pieces of environmental justice legislation did not pass, as Brandy mentioned at the start of our meeting tonight. One would have made permanent an interagency working group charged with examining how state agencies handle environmental justice issues, along with some other pieces like requiring local communities' comprehensive plans to include environmental justice in those plans. The other piece of legislation would have required developers seeking environmental permits to notify affected communities much earlier in the permitting process. Arguments were put forth that the requirements in the bills would burden economic development, especially in rural communities. As we make the transition to a renewable energy economy, environmental justice and economic development will likely continue to be at odds. Do you have any thoughts on how to reconcile these interests, or better, how to overcome the pressures of economic development to secure healthy communities for everyone? I know that's not a small question, but also due to your past history with the General Assembly, do you have any ideas on how we can push to get that legislation passed in the next session?
Well, I'm not familiar with those particular pieces of legislation other than your wonderful description of them. And so I'm not necessarily familiar with the politics behind it, but I will say this: the General Assembly as a whole has made giant strides in the area of the climate crisis in the past this past session, as well as the one before that. And I'm proud of the work that they've done. As far as these particular pieces of legislation are concerned, one thing that I learned as a member of the General Assembly is that you have to try and try and try again. You have to be willing to be literally Wile E. Coyote and run off the cliff or leave an imprint on the side of a mountain to get your point across. And I know that you all are prepared to do that. And I just urge you not to give up on these seemingly important pieces of legislation. That being said, I think there's still a role for the federal government to help influence what states and localities do. We're going to be coming up with, again, you heard me talk about the monies that the president has proposed for EJ communities. We're not above putting strings on that money. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but we're not above saying to localities, hey, if you're going to take this money, you got to be willing to do X, Y, and Z. You got to be willing to have these meaningful consultations. You got to be willing to do many of the things that you've suggested that this legislation would have required. So that might be a way that we can assist in nudging the assemblies of the general assemblies of the several states and towards doing the right thing. One of the cautions with that is this, though. We want to make sure that we get the money to the localities, but we also need to understand that what I do in Washington affects 50 states, not one, which is why Washington is so much slower and more deliberative than, I won't say more deliberative, but I will say slower than the General Assembly, because the impact is so wide and the people who have input are so many and so varied. So we don't want to hold it up too much with too many strings, but we do want to make sure that EJ communities are being treated fairly, that their concerns are being heard. One thing that I liked that you talked about was the part about interagencies. And I'm not as familiar with the legislation as you are, but please know that on the national level, we're working assiduously, and the Biden administration is in favor of having an EJ office in every single agency, so that we have someone to turn to and someone who's in these agencies thinking about how does this agency interface with EJ communities? How can we best serve this community? And how can we best make sure we're delivering services that this community wants or needs, and that we're making sure it lands on the target? So that sort of idea, if I'm understanding with your description of the legislation correctly, that's sort of that same idea is germinated on the federal level.
Thank you very much. And I apologize, but we are running short on time. And
I'm talking too much.
We have time for one more question, and that will be from Jackie McIntyre in the Peninsula chapter.
Good afternoon. My name is
Good afternoon.
Jacqueline McIntyre, and I'm from the Newport News chapter. And my question is, with the national plan of public transportation, I'm a bus rider. I have been. I'm driving now, but I know the plight of the bus rider. We need something that's more effective, more something for economic growth. Can you give me an answer as to how this will help us in our area?
What will help you? The EJ for All?
Sir?
You said how this will help you. What are you talking? What is the this? What will help you?
HRT. Our problem here in the Newport News area is public transportation.
Well, public transportation is a problem everywhere. So, but let me just say this: if this doesn't answer your question, come back at me. But one of the things that among the things that we need to do is to make sure that as we transform our public transportation fleet to electrical vehicles, that they are nice vehicles, right? They are vehicles that you want to ride in, that folks who, regardless of whatever economic class they may hail from, feel comfortable in. So oftentimes we don't treat public transportation as a mode of transportation for everyone. So we just let it sort of fall apart. We let, graffiti come out and just messy buses and the like. And I'm not saying that's what's happening in Newport News because I don't know. But I do know that public transportation needs to be treated like a limousine service in many ways. It needs to be high class, it needs to be comfortable, and at the same time affordable. And I think that's part of our goal as we convert the fleet to electrical vehicles. Um, I don't know if that addresses your question or not, but that's sort of the vision that's the vision that some of us have in Washington as we think about our transportation needs and as we begin to think about what this infrastructure plan is going to look like.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thank you once again, Congressman, for being willing to answer those questions. I wish we had so much more time with you and we could get to everybody, but we encourage you to send questions if you still have them. And would it be okay, Congressman, if we need answers to those questions, if we could contact you for some answers?
You certainly may. And
Thank
I have to be a little parochial, though. 4th Congressional District constituents come first.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you for that. Well, we want to thank everybody once again for being here tonight. We want to thank those who shared their experiences with us and those who asked some very, very thoughtful questions. Please, please, please continue to reach out to and contact your representatives to let them know that you support environmental justice legislation. They really need to hear from us. For those who are without an organizational home, we invite you to join Virginia Organizing. Please be in touch with your local chapter. We would love to work with you on these issues. And for those who are already in other organizations, please reach out to us so that we can figure out the best way to partner as we work on environmental justice across our state. And we also encourage everybody to donate to our work. Virginia-organizing.org. You have heard tonight some of the challenges, some of the work that we're trying to do, and we would love to have your support. So together we can keep moving forward and we can keep making a difference. Thank you all again for being here tonight, and we'll see you next time.